The Valkyrie cruiser unyielding Dominion had 17 decks, 42 weapons systems, and a crew of 911. It had never lost a single engagement. Riven noticed none of this. He was looking at the dog. Specifically, he was looking at the three-legged mutt currently pressing her nose into the glass of the holding cell, fogging it with breath that smelled, somehow, of old socks and unconditional love. Her name was Biscuit. She was 8 pounds of disaster wrapped in fur the color of a bad decision. She was also the only reason Riven was still alive. He'd been captured on Kepler Station doing something monumentally stupid. The specifics weren't important, except that they involved a stolen fuel cell, bad directions, and a municipal firework intended for a different purpose entirely. The Valkyrie patrol had caught him mid-sprint, Biscuit under one arm, screaming words that didn't translate cleanly into any galactic language. They'd taken his weapons, his comm, his boots, which felt like a personal insult. They had not taken Biscuit, because the first officer who'd reached for her had pulled back a hand with 4 fewer teeth marks than he'd started with, and the second officer had simply looked at her superior and said, wordlessly, "You do it." Nobody did it. Biscuit was still here. On the other side of the glass, Commander Celera of the Valkyrie 3rd Fleet was doing something she almost never did. She was hesitating. The human, Riven, the scan said, 29 years old, Earthborn, approximately 183 centimeters of documented bad judgment, was sitting cross-legged on the cell floor with the small quadruped in his lap, not looking at her, looking at the animal, scratching behind its ears with a focus so absolute it was almost meditative. The quadruped had 3 legs and what appeared to be a permanent underbite and no strategic value whatsoever. She had studied humans for 11 years. Every report said the same things. Adaptable, irrational, distressingly unpredictable under pressure, capable of violence that made Valkyrie tacticians take notes. None of the reports mentioned this. None of them mentioned whatever the human was doing right now, which was speaking softly to the animal in a register too low to translate, and the animal was responding by pressing the entirety of its small, absurd body into his chest. Celera had interrogated warlords. She had negotiated treaties that reshuffled entire sectors. She had no operational framework for whatever this was. She walked in anyway. Riven looked up. She was tall. Valkyrie always were, with that particular gray-blue complexion and the 4 sets of secondary eyelids that blinked in sequence when they were assessing something. She had command insignia on her collar and the expression of someone who had made decisions that kept her awake and made them anyway. He'd seen that face before. Not on a Valkyrie. On a mirror. Biscuit turned around in his lap twice, settled, and went to sleep. Riven said nothing. The commander said, "The quadruped bit my officer." She was nervous. My officer was nervous too. He was the one with the gun. A pause. In Solara's people, a pause like that was called Veltheris, the moment before a thing becomes permanent. There was no human word for it. Riven didn't know the Valkyrie word. He felt it anyway. "She is a companion animal," Celera said. "Not a weapon. Not cargo. We do not have a processing category for her." Riven looked at her steadily. "She's my dog." Celera processed this. "Yes, that is what I said." "No." He shifted Biscuit slightly. She snored once and went deeper. "You said what she is." "I said what she is to me." "Those aren't the same thing." Celera found herself sitting in the chair across from him before she'd made a decision to do so. This happened sometimes. Decision and action. Humans, she had read, often experienced this as simultaneous. For Valkyrie, there was always a gap. A calculation. A Veltheris. She seemed to be losing that gap. In his presence. She noted it. Filed it somewhere she would not look at until later. "You were stealing fuel cells," she said. "Borrowing. From a military depot. I left a note." She stopped. Restarted. What did the note say? It said borrowed 1 fuel cell. Will replace, signed Riven. Also your fireworks are too close to your fuel cells, and you should think about that. She stared at him. He scratched Biscuit's ears. Something in Solara's chest did something she did not have clearance to feel. He'd been here 11 hours. The interrogation logs were empty because every time she'd sent someone in, they'd come back out 12 minutes later with the particular expression of a person who'd been forced to recalibrate their assumptions about humanity and found the experience exhausting. She'd read the transcripts. "Lieutenant Karas, he asked me what my childhood was like. I don't know how it happened. I was in there for 20 minutes. Ensign Vale. He told me a story about a thing called a hot dog. Not the animal. A different thing. I have questions I'm afraid to have answered. Third analyst Tren. The dog looked at me, and I left. I don't want to discuss it. Celera had decided she'd go herself. She was discovering this was not the strategic advantage she'd anticipated. Why the dog? She asked. Riven looked up from Biscuit's ears. She watched him decide whether to answer. The decision took 3 seconds. She counted. Found her in a dumpster behind a protein plant on Mira Station, he said. She was 4 months old. One of her back legs was already gone. Something had gotten to her. A beat. Just one. She was fighting it. Celera did not ask what had gotten to her. She understood, from something in his voice that she couldn't name in her language, that the answer was the least important part of the sentence. The fighting, she said. Yeah. You recognized it. He looked at her. Really looked, for the first time, like she'd moved from obstacle to person in a single step. Yeah, he said. Quieter. She had 11 years of human behavioral study. No footnote had ever mentioned this, the way they attached. Not like Velthari, who bonded through contract and shared survival and the slow mathematics of trust. Humans seemed to bond through something faster and more catastrophic, like a detonation rather than a foundation. She found herself wondering what it would feel like. She filed that thought too, somewhere deep, under lock. It was hour 14 when one of the junior officers made the mistake. His name was Dravak. He was young, eager, and had something to prove, which was the most dangerous combination in any species. He'd been assigned to transfer the prisoner to a more secure cell while Celera was on the bridge. He'd walked in with 3 soldiers and a weapon. He'd pointed the weapon at Biscuit. Move the animal, he'd said, or I will move it. Riven went very still. Not the stillness of fear. The other kind. The kind that something coiled makes right before it stops being still. Biscuit looked up. She assessed the situation with the particular clarity of a 3-legged dog who had survived worse things than Dravak, and decided to growl anyway. Riven stood slowly. The room. This was the part Dravak would report later, when he'd stopped shaking enough to speak. Seemed to change temperature. Put that down, Riven said. Dravak, to his profound misfortune, did not. Celera arrived on the bridge feed in time to watch 3 trained Velthari soldiers discover that human threat assessment had certain parameters they'd been inadequately briefed on. She watched them discover it in real time. She may have said something to the officer next to her. She wasn't sure. She was watching the screen. The weapon was on the floor. Dravak was against the wall. The other 2 soldiers were engaged in the specific activity of reconsidering their life choices. Riven was standing over Biscuit, breathing hard. Not angry. Done. There was a difference. She knew at the moment she saw his face on the screen. Anger had heat in it. This had already burned through heat and come out the other side as something colder. He picked up Biscuit. She licked his jaw. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Celera walked into the cell 7 minutes later. Alone. Riven looked at her. She looked at him. You're releasing me, he said. Not a question. Yes, she said. Because of that. A nod toward where Dravak had been standing. Because, she said carefully, I have studied your species for 11 years, and I have always understood the military documentation, the threat assessments, the tactical data. She paused. Veltharis. I did not understand, she stopped. Chose differently. I had not seen why your species is what it is. He waited. You are not dangerous because you are strong, she said. You are dangerous because you love things. The silence after that was the kind that couldn't be walked back from. Biscuit sneezed. Riven, slowly, almost against his own will, smiled. He was at the docking bay when she caught up with him. He turned around. She held out his boots. He looked at them, looked at her. The Kepler station fuel cell situation, she said, I am willing to classify as a misunderstanding. If you are willing to be somewhere less destructive for the next 48 hours. 48 hours. The treaty summit on Varen 4 needs a human cultural liaison who can be trusted to cause only a specific and manageable level of chaos. She kept her voice entirely level. You appear to specialize in that. Riven tilted his head. 3 seconds. She counted. Does Biscuit get credentials? Celera looked at the 3-legged dog currently investigating her boot with deep personal interest. I will have a badge fabricated, she said. Her title can be consultant. Biscuit looked up at her with the expression of an animal who had already decided she was acceptable. Riven put his boots on. 48 hours, he said. Sure. Later, much later, when the mission reports were filed and certain feelings could no longer be diplomatically ignored, Celera would think back to this moment. Not the fight, not the cell, not the 11 years of study. The moment a three-legged dog decided she was acceptable. She'd been trying to earn that for years, from her fleet, from her command, from herself. It had taken 8 pounds of fur and 4 seconds. Humans, she had written in her final behavioral addendum, do not love things because the things are perfect. They love things because the things are theirs. This is, perhaps, the most dangerous thing about them. It is also, I am compelled by intellectual honesty to note, possibly the most important.